Hi there! It's me, Cool Dude Clem, also known as the Music Wizard. Probably heard my knee click just then, I'm getting old. Anyway, many people say they have trouble downloading my sample packs. Music Wizard, Open MPT, Instrument Collection, whatever I called it. Well, that's rather outdated now, and since then I've been collecting more and more samples, and I have made a huge update to my sample packs. And rather than release them all as one big file, which I know some of you had a problem with, I'm going to release them all individually. So there's going to be one for bass, there's going to be one for drums, there's going to be one for guitars, and so on. Anyway, first off though, before we move on to things like drums and pianos and bass and all that good stuff, I want to go over some of the smaller sample packs I've been working on. You know, this is the stuff like chip sounds, percussion and wind instruments and a whole bunch of other stuff. So let's get into that. And then in the next videos we'll look at things like bass and drums and guitars and pianos and all that good stuff. I know I don't have the best narration voice, but at least I don't talk in a monotonous tone and emphasize the wrong syllables, like some narrators on YouTube do. So first off, I have made a huge update to the chip sounds library. I'll start with the two biggest updates. It now has all 15 instruments from the VRC7 expansion chip, which I believe was only ever used in one NES game. And on the Sega side of things, there is all 15 instruments from the YM2149 chip, which was used in several Sega Master System games. They're both pretty similar. The only real difference between the two chips is that, well, one of them has slightly different instruments to the other one, and the YM2149 also has drums, which I've also sampled. Of course, most of them don't really sound like what they say they are, but, you know, what can you expect? This is basic FM synthesis. And, in my opinion, you know, I think that's what really gives them their charm. Now, the only downside is that I had to multi-sample most of these sounds because, well, I had to multi-sample all of them because, you know, a lot of them have long morphing waveforms and vibrato and things like that, and I wanted to capture that as best as I could. So, yeah, they're a bit big for chip samples, but they're now there if you want them. And of course you don't just have to limit this to chip tunes. I'm sure some of these sounds would fit in very well in electronic music. I mean, heck, you could go crazy and do a crossover between the two chips, you know, using sounds from the YM2149 and the 2A03, VRC7. Things like Family Tracker and Furnace, it wasn't difficult to get these sounds. I've also gone and sampled all the VRC6 sounds. So there's all 8 pulse widths, or duty cycles, whatever you want to call them. And also all the different possible sawtooth waves. Now you may think that's a bit of a waste, having all of these sawtooth waves, because they do sound alike, but there are differences. If we take a listen to this one, and then this one, you can hear they sound the same, but there are some subtle differences. If we take a look at the waveform of the first one we heard, and the waveform of the second one we heard, you can see that this little bit in the middle here is a lot more pronounced. I've also made some additions to the AY folder. So this now has some of the sounds from the YM2149F chip, not to be confused with the YM2149 that the Sega Master System used. That's a completely different chip. YM2149 was an FM synthesis, whereas the YM2149F was, well, like a clone of the AY. So there is now not only the volume envelope sounds from the AY chip, but also the volume envelope sounds from the YM chip. So whereas the AY has 16 steps in its volume envelope, giving you a pretty rough sound, the YM chip has 32 steps, which makes it a lot smoother and sounds slightly different. It's not so noticeable with the sawtooth waves, but with the triangle waves, yeah, you can really hear it. And lastly, in the AY folder, there's this thing called ST-SID, which was basically me dicking around on an Atari ST music tracker with the SID effect. You know, makes it sound like a Commodore 64. The way it works is pretty simple. It plays a square wave and then turns the volume of that square wave on and off really quickly, at round about the same frequency as whatever note's playing, and that produces that PWM SID-like effect. And that too has been multi-sampled. So, yeah, if you want to make something that sounds like an Atari ST SID music, well, now you can. Anyway, the very last thing I want to go over in the chip sounds folder is that when I was making the NES and Game Boy sounds, I accidentally, in both of them, mislabeled the 12.5 duty cycle as 15.5. I really just cannot believe I made the same mistake twice, but yeah, that's also been fixed now. Okay, so with that out the way, it's time to move on to the miscellaneous stuff, which is the actual point of this video. So first off, the Amiga sound tracker libraries. So in this folder, I have the sounds from just about every sound tracker disc ever made. These are the actual samples that people used when making music on Amigas back in the day. I mean, okay, they weren't just restricted to using just these sounds, but these are what came on those discs. Now, just in wave format. Trouble is that if you try to play one of these, it's playing way too fast. You see, the thing is, on the Amiga, things were sampled at about 8.3 kilohertz, and this is playing back at like 44, so yeah. No wonder it's playing so fast. Not a problem though, because in Modplug Tracker we can change the playback frequency, so we just change that to 8363, and everything is good. Well, it'll work for most of them anyway.
This is Elmer Davis again. We still don't know what it is or where it comes from, but there's something there. It's been tracked around the Earth by radar, traveling at a rate of 4,000 miles an hour. This is not another flying saucer scare.
So, next thing I want to talk about is the choirs. Now, I know this might not be the most interesting sound, but unlike your general MIDI choir, you're not just limited to your oohs and your ahs here. There's a lot more than that. So, how does that sound in the mix? Well, kind of like this. And yeah, I know I'm just using the R sound there, but you know, you get the idea. And staying on the sort of ethnic side of things, there's the ethnic instruments themselves. I'm not really going to go through them all. In fact, I'm not really a fan of world music at all, but I do really like these Indian instruments. Got some nice freaky sounds there. Does anyone fancy a Vindaloo? So next up is the Mallets folder, and this is things like your xylophones, gongs, timpanis, things like that. And this is another one I worked pretty hard on getting all the samples for. So you got your marimba, xylophone, jazzy vibraphone, and last but not least, glockenspiel, which I believe these days is called orchestral bells for no explained reason. Better not play too much of that or I might get a copyright strike. But yeah, there's also other stuff in here like gongs, timpanis, tubular bells, and this is my own crappy rendition of it, so don't give me a copyright strike. Now in this next one, anyone who's familiar with Music 2000 or its predecessor, music creation for the PlayStation, you'll be familiar with these sounds. You see, back in 2016, I had some software where I could rip sounds from PlayStation games, and I tried it on this one and it worked. So I was able to get all the sounds that way. And although I've only ripped the sounds from Music 2000, and I think this is okay because this is outdated, no longer sold software, Music 2000 has all the sounds that music, the first music had, so yeah, I only needed to rip the sounds from Music 2000, and the original music sounds came with it. For those of you who don't know what I was talking about, well, back in like 1999 and 2000, there were a couple of, I could say, DAWs for the PlayStation, and it had its own built-in pre-recorded instruments, phrases, vocals, and sound effects. And yeah, it's all here, mostly in WAV format. And although most of these are one-shots, some of the instruments did have multiple notes sampled, like some of the pianos for instance. So what I did in those cases was just put all of the individual samples into an ITI file and edit the sample map so it plays the right notes, just to make it easier. So let's hear one of the pianos. very nice. Now, I'm not much of a synthesizer person. In fact, I think along the lines of, if you've heard one synthesizer, you've heard them all. However, I do sometimes use synthesizers in my music, and I have sampled many VSTs that replicate the sounds of vintage synthesizers. So you got your bass, your fundamental waveforms, things like sine, saw, square, sawtooth, that kind of stuff, various other synthesizer sounds, and even a DX7. Yeah, the plugin Dext, or Dexed, I don't know how you pronounce it, does a really good emulation of the Yamaha DX7, and as it can load in ROM dumps of the original cartridges, and as I just so happen to have those ROM dumps, I was able to sample all of my favourite sounds, which includes some of the sounds that famous bands used back in the day. Getting to the final two now. So, next one I want to talk about is the virtual guitarist samples. Now, as this is from another product that is no longer sold, I don't think there's any legal issues in sharing the samples. So what this is basically short guitar notes and strummed chords and things like that. And generally when I'm working on a song and I need strumming guitars in the background, I'll usually go in here, find the sounds I want, and load them in. And although these days there's much better stuff even in the freeware department, I still like to use this sometimes. It has its uses. And finally, the wind instruments, which I've just called wind. So, like a lot of the other ones here, this is one that's had a few updates. This has the kind of stuff like, clarinets, flutes, saxophones, that kind of stuff. I wouldn't say they're the best sounding samples in the world, but I'm going to show you a little trick here. So, let's say I want to make this clarinet solo here sound a bit more legato. If I play it as it is right now, you can hear, it's a clarinet solo, but it doesn't really sound all that real and it sounds pretty ghastly, right? But if I go into the Instruments tab and set the new note action to note fade, and make the fade out time a little bit faster. Now when I play it, now we're starting to get somewhere. But we can go even further than that. If we add a bunch of random sample cues to each note, but keep the first note of each phrase clean, we have in fact faked round robins. There's now just one more thing to do. Go into the Instruments tab again, turn the ramping all the way up. Now when we play it, so yeah, we've faked round robins while at the same time making it sound legato. Anyway, that just about brings us to the end of this video. I will leave links where you can download the sample packs. And in the next video, or videos, we'll be taking a look at the drums, strings, brass, pianos, and of course, the one I'm sure you've all been waiting for, the guitars. Yep, it's finally done. Well, anyway, I've got about an hour of speech to edit down now, so I'm gonna go off and do that, and until next time, goodbye. Which I've just called wind. No, not that kind of wind. Jane. Stop farting. Wasn't me. Oh yeah, if it was one of yours, it would have busted the wall down. Anyway, what was I? Oh yeah. I really just cannot believe I made the same mistake twice, but yeah, that's also been fixed now. Fucking cat. Much better. I ain't disappointed. Tails may be disappointed in my recent decisions, but I ain't. So yeah, we've faked round robins, while at the same time making it sound legato. Kind of funny really. Yeah, musical terminology. Well, it sounds Italian to me. Legato, staccato, pizzicato. Pizza, I like the pizza. Ostinato, vibrato. Cannelloni. Lasagna. Spaghetti. Pizza. Mamma mia, I've turned into Mario.